Oh no. Dear Tim and Moby, we just read about the Tuskegee Airmen, but our textbook really didn't say that much. Can you tell us more about them? From Mrs. Cave's class. Hey guys. The Tuskegee Airmen were America's first black military pilots. During World War II, they flew hundreds of dangerous missions in Africa and Europe. But they showed even more courage in fighting a homegrown enemy. America was still a segregated society. African Americans were kept apart from whites, living as second-class citizens. In the South, this divide was codified through Jim Crow laws. Up north, segregation was preserved through informal rules. In spite of this awful treatment, black men and women lined up to serve their country after Pearl Harbor. Japan's raid on the Hawaiian Naval Air Base shocked the nation. America entered World War II the next day. In the years that followed, millions enlisted in the armed forces. Pilots were in especially high demand. But like so many other opportunities, joining the Army Air Corps had always been closed to African Americans. Just as in civilian life, racism shaped America's armed forces. Officers questioned the fitness of the thousands of black soldiers who'd served in World War I. The Army War College even released a report documenting their doubts. It said that during World War I, African American troops showed a lack of initiative, leadership, and bravery. The report was used to justify keeping black servicemen in low-level roles. African American leaders were undeterred. They lobbied the government to expand opportunities for black soldiers. In 1941, less than a year before Pearl Harbor, the Army Air Corps finally gave in. It would accept African Americans into its ranks. Well, they had permission to be pilots, but they didn't get much support. They would serve in segregated units, apart from white servicemen. The first of these was the 99th Fighter Squadron, led by Benjamin Davis, Jr. Its pilots were trained at the Tuskegee Institute, a renowned black college in Alabama. That's why the 99th soon became known as the Tuskegee Airmen. Segregation was just one of the obstacles they faced. Top military brass viewed the Tuskegee program as an experiment, something more for show than actual combat. So they kept delaying the 99th's deployment. Tuskegee commanders had to petition and plead to take part in active combat. When they finally entered the fray, it was far from the war's main center of action. Equipped with outdated aircraft, they were limited to ground attacks, so they rarely encountered enemy planes for air-to-air battles. Some supervisors twisted that into a sign of poor performance. One even wrote a report accusing the airmen of cowardice. He recommended they be sent home and demoted to non-combat roles. But the Air Corps determined that the criticisms were totally unfounded. The 99th was as capable as any other squadron. It was soon assigned to escort bombers across the Mediterranean. The massive planes were slow and vulnerable to enemy fire. Zippier solo fighters flew nearby to defend them. The 99th wasted little time in proving they belonged, diving, weaving, and soaring as they took out German warplanes. The success helped the 99th expand their operations. They joined up with 3 other black squadrons and were issued red-tailed P-51 fighters. Together, they developed a top-notch record for escorting bombers. Other pilots often left formation to chase enemy planes and personal glory. The Red Tails were known for sticking by bombers, protecting them at all costs. Bombing crews began requesting them for missions. Pretty soon, they were making headlines back home. One pilot, Robert Dees, even made it onto one of those cool old war posters. The attention and praise were not lost on the pilots. Showing they could fly, and fly well, was a victory for all African Americans. But it also meant that any mistake would be put under a microscope. One mission in particular solidified the Red Tails' reputation. A bombing run on a tank factory deep inside Germany. The bombs were dropped, and the target was destroyed. Suddenly, strange streaks appeared in the sky. Nazi jet fighters, the first ever used in combat. Other warplanes were propeller-driven. Jet engines gave the German planes more power and speed, but they were also much less nimble, and Roscoe Brown took notice. He quickly dove down, out of the jet's line of sight, then pulled up to attack from below. He was the first American pilot to down a jet. His fellow fighters took out 2 more that day, earning the Red Tails a Distinguished Unit Citation. Actually, all that fame and fanfare didn't really change much back home. The airmen returned to a nation that was still segregated. Charles Hall, the first Red Tail to shoot down an enemy plane, applied to be a pilot at every major airline. None hired him, or any other black aviator. Still, members of the 99th did manage to find success. Hall eventually built a career in the Federal Aviation Administration. Robert Dees worked as a test pilot and aeronautical engineer. Roscoe Brown became a professor and a college president. And Benjamin Davis Jr. served as the Air Force's first African-American general. Yep, thanks to pioneers like the Red Tails, the armed services integrated shortly after the war. It was an early victory for the budding civil rights movement. In the decades to come, the federal government would expand its role in protecting the rights of African Americans and the rights of other marginalized groups. Yeah, injustice never just ends overnight. It takes brave people to challenge it and show everyone else that there's another way. Shh, do you hear that? That's a shame.